Thank y'all for being here today. I am here to talk to you about money, but maybe not in the way that you think I would be here to talk to you about money. I am here not to sell you anything, but I'm here to advocate for a money that more accurately reflects the value of our work. And I'm going to do that by comparing and contrasting the US monetary system, which is the system we currently use, and the Bitcoin monetary system. But before we jump into that, I have a very basic question that I had to ask myself before even presenting this. And that question is, how often do you think about money? My guess is a lot. So whether it's shopping, saving, or investing, you think about getting up in the morning, and the reality is you have to decide, am I going to buy my lunch? Am I going to pack my lunch? Am I going to buy that amazing coffee up the street? Or am I going to make it at home? So you're making monetary decisions all the time. But have you ever taken the time to understand how money actually works? And as you can see, this visual up here, it looks very complicated. But the reality is that money, its job is actually quite simple. Money's job is to accurately reflect the value of your work. So it's not just reflecting the value of your work in just a sphere of we're talking about systems and we're talking about money and policy and things like that. It is very personal because what happens to our money affects us, it affects our families, it affects our entire communities and economies. So I will just share two personal experiences where my family has been impacted by mismanagement in the monetary system. So in the 1930s, the value of my great-grandfather's work was destroyed because of bank mismanagement. And as you know, 1930s, that was the Great Depression. So the vast majority of people, if not all in the US, were significantly affected by mismanagement of the monetary system at the time. So let's fast forward though. That's the mismanagement most of us remember. We've learned about it in school. But let's fast forward to the 1980s. So in 1986, the value of my father's work was destroyed because of government mismanagement. So I don't know how many of y'all are connected anyway to agriculture or farming or own land or anything like that? Was nice. So you know what goes into farming. And what happened in the 1980s was an agricultural crash because the government had printed too much money. It had caused significant inflation, and they were trying to get a hold of inflation by ramping interest rates up. So when my father was farming, he was looking at 18 plus interest rates. And we're not talking about, oh, my dad's going to go out and buy a Ferrari. We're talking about interest rates on seed, interest rates on equipment, interest rates on fertilizer, all of those things that you have to take out a loan for to put food on our tables, right? So my dad lost everything in that crash. That it would have been the equivalent of about $3 million today, simply because of mismanagement of the money. So at the end of the day, it was all about the money. But it's helpful to step back and say, okay, well, if we have to trust all these big players with our money and what's happening with the system itself, let's ask, why do we even need money? Maybe we can just opt out of the system. Well, let's see. Money actually makes it easier to trade what you have for what you want. So for example, I have eggs, Joel has a cow. That would be hard to trade, right? Although with the price of eggs right now, maybe it wouldn't be as hard as we think. Yeah, 1 to 1. So that's hard to trade. It's hard to trade a cow for a house, or definitely a house for eggs. So money solves that problem. It makes it easier to trade. So that's what money does. It values our work by empowering us to purchase what we need and want so that we don't have to trade things anymore. We don't have to have a bartering system. But money doesn't operate alone. Money operates within a system. Just like what I mentioned before, we have the US monetary system and the Bitcoin monetary system. Those are operating within a system. But what does the monetary system do? Well, it creates, distributes, and regulates the money. And this is really important right here because in the US monetary system, the US dollar is what's being created, distributed, and regulated. With Bitcoin, in the Bitcoin monetary system, Bitcoin is being created, distributed, and regulated. So whenever you hear Joel or me or anyone talk about Bitcoin, we could be referring to Bitcoin, the monetary system, or Bitcoin, the money, because it functions as both and it has the same name. I don't know why they did that, but that's what they did. All right, so the US dollar is the money in the US monetary system. So let's talk about the big players within the US monetary system. There's the banks, the central bank, and the government. These are all major players that are managing our money. And of course, we have taxes, so that goes without saying. So a monetary system has to manage two things: who owns what money and the total amount of money. So we can think of this as a spreadsheet. I don't know about you, but sometimes my eyes cross looking at spreadsheets, but I promise this is going to be a simplified spreadsheet. So let's look at the US dollar system spreadsheet first. This number is the only number most people think about, my money. How many dollars do I have? But dollars in the system is also just as important. Now, why is that true? Because it determines what my dollars can buy. It determines my purchasing power. So if you take my dollars, divide them by all the dollars in the system, it determines what stuff I can buy. So if I have $100, there's $1,000 in the system, I'm able to buy 10% of the stuff in the system. So what happens when dollars in the system goes up? If that increases, my purchasing power falls. So it's fallen by half. I'm down to 5% of what dollars can buy now. So we can ask the question, well, how many dollars are there exactly? Because it changes the value of the dollars that I have. Well, currently there are $22 trillion in the system. So right now, $100 can buy a 1 gram set of gold earrings. I know those are kind of hard to see, but it's just two little stud earrings. So $100 can buy you a 1 gram set of gold earrings. But has the US dollar supply always been 22 trillion, and has $100 always bought this much? That may seem like an obvious question because I know many of us remember days when, gas was under $1 and things like that, but it's worth looking at. The US prints 7% more dollars on average every year. So the number of dollars in the system has grown 75 times since 1960. So in 1960, there were $286 billion in the system, and $100 bought 88 grams of gold. So there's a significant difference of purchasing power in the 60s as opposed to now. So when that number's rising, our purchasing power is falling. Printing money is a major reason why you see all of these prices rising across the board of going to the grocery store. It doesn't matter if you're buying a house, whatever you're doing, prices have risen just across the board. So we'll use a Big Mac as an example. Hopefully the restaurant we're in won't mind too much. The price of Big Macs from 1968 was 45 cents. Now it's up to $5.29, so that has gone up 12 times. And Campbell's soup has gone up 10 times. So the same stuff is more expensive. All of these things have increased in price. But wait, there is a caveat here. Hasn't that number gone up? haven't my wages gone up? Well, yes, but also no. They have gone up, but they have only gone up half as much as inflation. So what you've got now is your wages buy half as much soup and Big Macs as they did in 1975. You are working the same hours, you are doing the same work, but you can only buy half of what you did back then. So we have so much more money in the system now, but why don't we feel wealthier even though we have more money in the system? Well, as Adam Smith said, wealth does not consist in money, but in what money purchases. We've known that since 1776, so quite a while. So a decrease in your purchasing power, it equals a decrease in the value of our work. And that's something that has really struck me as I've engaged with Bitcoin, as I've engaged with the US monetary system, as I've seen my family's history in this. The reality was, it wasn't just money that my great-grandfather and my dad lost. It was their work. It was a lifetime of work put into the land, a lifetime of work put into the bank. So it's the value of our work that's being harmed here. So what's going on? So let's break this down just a little bit. Well, banks keep spreadsheets with all the green numbers of my money. Each bank records who owns what. Federal Reserve makes sure two people don't own the same dollars. So they're keeping track of all the money in the system. And it's actually a giant spreadsheet or a database. It just runs on computers, and they keep track of all the dollars in the system, even the ones in your pocket. But how do those dollars in the system change? That's definitely a question worth asking. So we have a Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and we have Jerome Powell as the head of that chair. And literally, he can click a mouse button and he can change that number to whatever number he wants. Now, he's not going to call it printing money, but that's in effect what it's doing. There are all sorts of different reasonings behind that money is printed, but in effect, it is hurting your purchasing power in the way that he does it. So if the dollars in the system go up easily, my purchasing power decreases quickly. And as the number of dollars go up, the value of the dollar goes down. So in 1935, a dollar was worth $1. Today, down by 95%, it's worth 5 cents, which is just a significant loss when it comes to the value of our money. So could we tie this number, the number of dollars to gold? Yes, we have tried that before in the US monetary system. We tried making a paper promise for gold where literally a $10 bill would say there is deposited in the treasury $10 worth of gold coins. So you could literally take your money and get gold for it. But in 1971, the US government broke that promise and took us off the gold standard. So now $10 is $10. It's the paper it's printed on. So what about different governments? Well, I have good news and bad news in that regard. The US dollar is actually the strongest currency in the world right now. So obviously, I'm sure everyone knows this, that every country prints its own money out. So, if I'm gonna go to Britain, I'm gonna have to exchange my US dollars for British pounds. So everyone is printing their own money out, but the money that they print is not even as strong as the US dollar. So when you look at how much value we've lost, it's significant in even more significant in other parts of the world. So the dollar is still king right now, but that's having an impact on us and the entire world. So are there any other options? Well, this is presumably why you're here, because I have the great news of saying there is another option, and that option is Bitcoin. But what exactly is Bitcoin? Well, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, that Bitcoin is a monetary system and it runs on software and it creates its own money, again, called Bitcoin. So it works like a spreadsheet that runs on computers, and it keeps track of my Bitcoin. If only I had 10 Bitcoin right now. I think it's at 103,000 per Bitcoin. That would be really nice, but it keeps track of my Bitcoin and your Bitcoin, and it limits the total Bitcoin in the system to 21 million. Anybody remember what the total amount of US dollars in the system was? 22 trillion. So this has a hard cap of 21 million, and it cannot be increased. All right, so Bitcoin software has hard-coded rules about who owns what and to enforce that 21 million limit. Now, this is a very important point, because when we were looking at the US monetary system, do you remember the big players in that system? Right, the banks, the Federal Reserve, and the government? Bitcoin automates that. So Bitcoin as a monetary system is not being manipulated by individuals or organizations or governments. It's hard-coded to automate these rules that it essentially lives by. So it's an important distinction between how these two monetary systems function. So the two main rules are who owns what and to enforce that 21 million limit. So first rule. All right, ownership of Bitcoin is protected by encryption keys. Now, if you have further questions about encryption keys, then at the end of this, I will hand them over to Joel, because how this works is too genius for me. I have looked into it, and it's incredible the way that the encryption keys work. But the main thing you need to remember is that it would take all the computers in the world 1 billion trillion years to crack one Bitcoin key. Now, if you use a third party, you know, that is a different story as far as how that works. So things like third parties can be hacked, but in self-custody with your own encryption keys, it's basically unhackable, as Joel would say. All right, so the computers running Bitcoin software, they connect to each other, and they make exact copies. So there's not just one overall spreadsheet keeping track of that. All the computers on all the networks are keeping track of it, until there's over 100,000 Bitcoin computers running the network, and they have all the same numbers. So if I have a key, I can send or spend my Bitcoin, and the numbers change on every computer. Again, not a centralized computer, every computer that is running the Bitcoin software. All right, rule number 2, the enforcing the 21 million limit. So this is from the White House. The Bitcoin protocol permanently caps the total supply of Bitcoin at 21 million coins and has never been hacked. The White House has done its homework, and this is what they've said. So it's never been hacked, and it limits that supply. So 21 million is all the Bitcoin. No one can make more. If they try to, Bitcoin is hard-coded to disconnect them. So they're over here with their little spreadsheet in their system all by themselves. There's no connection that's happening there. All right, so the value of Bitcoin is going up as more people adopt it, and the money in the dollar system is losing value. So money in the Bitcoin system is gaining value, but, and this is a very important question to interact with, Bitcoin's price is volatile. I'll just tell y'all a little story. When Joel gave me, you know, he periodically gives Bitcoin away, and I think he gave me $30. And when I opened my account, it was like, you have $30, and then suddenly it was $29.99, and then suddenly it was 30.05 or something like that. So, you know, I say that to say, don't let that make you nervous. You're just able to see in real time what the market's doing, which is pretty incredible. to be able to do. So let's talk about that volatility though, so that y'all have the confidence to be able to see what's going on here. All right, where does that price volatility come from? Well, we're still extremely early in the adoption cycle. We're at 3% of adoption. Bitcoin in 2025 is at 3%. So that's like online banking in 96. I don't know anyone who did online banking in 96, but I wasn't thinking about it at the time then. Social media in 2005 and the internet in 1990. So all of those technologies have changed the world, but it took time for them to change the world. So we're just very early in the adoption phase. Another thing to keep in mind is how volatile the world is. It's incredibly volatile. There are things going on all over the world. But the US dollar is actually a big player in all the things that are going on in the world. So the US dollar right now is 18% of the entire world's money. Again, US dollar is used by other nations as well. So the US dollar is like a large ship in a large ocean. The dollar is sinking slowly. And Bitcoin, in comparison, is only 1.3% of the world's money. So again, back to that volatility issue, Bitcoin's a little bit like a small little boat in the ocean. It is getting there and it is growing, but right now you're gonna feel it. You're gonna feel the ups and the downs. Yes, smaller systems go up and down more easily. Larger systems are more stable. But Bitcoin will get there. It's just gonna take time. So when in doubt, zoom out. And this is very important to keep in mind. Again, as you see that volatility kind of going up and down. All right, this is Bitcoin's price history every day. You can see all the jagged edges there, the drops and the higher points as well. But look at it every year. That's starting to smooth out. Every 2 years, we're pulling back even more. It's smoothing out even more. 3 years, and as you notice, it's all uphill. It's going up in value. And 4 years, you've just got a nice smooth line there. All right, this is, as Joel mentioned at the last meeting, this is one of his favorite quotes, and it has really grown on me because we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. So one of the things, especially for you guys who've never really interacted with Bitcoin before, Bitcoin is not a get-rich-quick scheme. As you can see from this PowerPoint, it is a new technology that is changing the world. But again, that takes time. And so, you know, in the long run, being able to automate a monetary system, it's never been done before, not in the digital age, of being able to do that. So again, this is not about some kind of get-rich-quick scheme. You know, you're not gonna have $1 million in your bank account tomorrow if you invest in Bitcoin today, but the technology and the genius behind it is what we're investing in, essentially. It's the solutions that solve so many of the problems in the monetary system that we're using. So all that to say, we have something now that my great-grandfather and my father never had, and that is a choice. They were forced to use the monetary system that they were born into. You know, and in some ways that worked out well. In some ways it was absolutely devastating. So it's beautiful to me that now we have an option that we've never had in the history of the world. And that option is Bitcoin, a better system and better money. Thank y'all so much for coming. If you want to learn more, we have joelbomgar.com live, and it's got all of, I mean, as you know, Joel has an incredible amount of resources that he's created himself. All of those resources are going to be available at Joel Bomgar. Also, if you are interested in just the community of Bitcoin, of being able to ask real-time questions, feel free to join our Bitcoin group. We have a little Facebook group, and that way, we can answer any questions you have in real time.